In this video, we're going to be looking at how to create a basic label using the 3-step basic label creation method in Lighthouse for CJ Pro. The beauty of this method is that it can be used to create pretty much any kind of sign or label as required. So something from a health and safety sign, like we have on the screen here, like a warning sign, to something like an asset label, to pipe marking, and so on. So as an example, let's try to create the label we have on the screen at the moment. So firstly, you'll need to open your software and start a new label. At this point, you'll be presented with the default label size on the screen, which of course we do not have to stick with. We can create labels that are much smaller or even much longer based on your requirements. So to get the software to change this label size, firstly, double click in the grey space outside of the label and the label setup box will pop up on the screen. There are a few tabs across the top of this box. We do not need to worry about the printer tab because we've just set that as we open the label up. So you can then move on to the paper layout tab. Inside here, you can choose the orientation of your label. Just like in Word, you can choose whether you'd like to print in portrait or landscape. And it's always best to play around with these as you can often reduce any kinds of wastage and make the best use of your material. This can be changed at any time during the design process as well. Once complete, you can then head to the Dimensions tab, and it's inside here where you will tell the software the size of the label that is required for yourself. So in here, I'm going to choose a label file that is 100mm by 100mm. You'll then see the preview on the right hand side will update to then reflect the label size that is required. Everything else in here can be left as the same, and you can quite simply click OK. The label size will then update on the screen, and that is essentially the first step of the basic label creation process complete by choosing the size and orientation of the label. The second step is then to insert text onto the label, and thirdly is to introduce any pictures onto the label. So heading back to the second step and introducing text, we have 3 different text options. We have text, curved text, and text box. The curved text is as it says on the tin. You can click on this option, click onto the label, type the information inside, and this text will then be curved on the label for you. However, the 2 most commonly used will of course be text and text box. These 2 options do have their pros and cons depending on what it is that you would like to do with your labels. However, we will take a look at both, but you may find yourself using one more frequently than most, and this tends to be the text option at the top, which we will start with now. So to use anything in this toolbar, firstly click the option you would like to use first, and then click on your label to make it active. You can then start typing in the information as required. Once complete, click away from the text. That's when it becomes active and inserted to the label, where you can then resize and move this around as required. Just like in Word, there is also the option to change the font types, so all of the usual kinds of fonts will be inside of here, as well as any personalized fonts that you may have installed on your computer at any point. You can also change the size of the text inside of here, and also you can type the size inside the box just as much. Additionally, we also have the bold, italic, and underline features similar to Word. The one thing the software doesn't have in comparison to Word is a spell check. The reason for this is a lot of people do tend to use the software to design signs and labels that are multi-language, and trying to get a dictionary to cover all these bases is very difficult to do so. However, you can have the text checked outside of the software and it can then be copied and pasted into the software. However, if something has already been inserted to the label, you don't have to delete this. You can quite simply edit the text just by simply double clicking the text itself to open its settings box. In here, you will then be given the option to update the text as required. Press OK, and this is then reflected on screen for you. These settings boxes are used frequently throughout the design process and is by far the easiest way to make any kind of alteration to anything that's on your label. So whether this is a piece of text, a graphic, a barcode, and so on. So now let's take a look at the text box option. So we're going to click on text box on the left hand toolbar and then click onto the label. In this instance, the setup box will pop up straight away and will ask you to type the information inside here first. Press OK, and this is then inserted onto the label, and as you can see, the box is much larger in comparison to our first option. You will also notice when you click away from this box, a black dashed line is always present as well. This is because these text boxes work in the same way as text boxes do in Word. So this means you will allocate a space for text to appear in, and no matter what it is that you type inside this box, it will never go beyond the boundaries of that box. So this means you could place something incredibly close to the edge of a label, update the information that goes inside of there, and it will never wander outside of the label or potentially interfere with anything else on your label. So often this option is used for things like variable based data. So the software does have the ability to connect to things like Excel spreadsheets that contain data, or it can also create sequential numbers where this data is changing automatically. So if this information varies quite wildly, having this text box in place gives you the safety of that text never wandering outside of the allocated space. However, for this basic label creation process, we're going to remove this text box and stick with our basic text option to begin with. Now the software does also have an alignment feature, so if you would like things to be placed perfectly on your label, you can do this by hand and by eye, or the software can align this option for you instead. So to use this, quite simply click the object you would like to align, and at the top of the software we have our alignment toolbar. Now if you hover over these buttons, they will tell you what they do. So we have left, center and right, top, vertical center and bottom. Now at the moment, if I do click on these buttons with the text selected, nothing happens, and the only reason is we need to keep our finger on the control button on the keyboard for these buttons to work. So if I want this text to be at the very center of the label, I can keep my finger on control and then click on the center option going left to right, and then the vertical center option, and this is now applied to the center of the label. Additionally, you can also use your arrow keys on your keyboard to make minor adjustments as required. So in this instance, I'm going to place the text at the bottom and then centralize that to make it neat. This is now the second step complete, and we've inserted text, and the third and final step is to introduce any kinds of graphics onto your label. The software does have a clip art gallery built into it already, with lots of useful symbols such as health and safety signs, arrows and other kinds of images. So to get into this clip art gallery, quite simply click on the picture option on the left hand side and click onto your label, where a browsing window will then open. You can then click on the clip art gallery button at the bottom, and this will open the clip art gallery. All of the categories will be presented inside of here. They are in alphabetical order to try and make them easy to navigate. Quite simply, find the graphic that is required, click on the graphic, you're given a preview just to the bottom left, and if you're happy with this graphic, click OK, and the graphic is then inserted into the label, where it can then be resized and moved around in the same way as we did with the text earlier on. Once the graphic is inside the label, this is the third step complete, and you can then go ahead and print your labels as required.